Okay, let's jump right into this explainer and unpack a seriously chilling sequence of events experienced by a lost traveler named Raghu. We're looking at a classic, terrifying setup from our source material today. Just a stormy, rainy night where a completely simple journey goes horribly, horribly wrong. Raghu is just your ordinary, everyday guy, but he's carrying something that adds a massive layer of tension to this whole situation, a bag full of his life savings. And as we're about to see, the elements are about to turn completely against him.
Oh God, stop this storm, protect me. That is the desperate prayer of our protagonist. Picture this. He's stranded on his bicycle, clutching this bag of money, desperately trying to reach the village of Kusumpur before the darkness just swallows him whole. His plea echoes out into the absolute void as he's pushing as hard as he can on the pedals, but the environment is simply too hostile. Nature, it seems, has entirely different plans for him tonight.
The source text points out a terrifying meteorological shift right here, which is that dead silence of the wind right before a massive storm hits. The author expertly uses this to signal impending doom. You know that feeling, right? The sky turns this ominous ash gray, the air goes completely dead, and suddenly, boom, he's caught in a blinding, terrifying downpour. The sheer force of the rain and lightning literally forces him off his path. He tries to take shelter under a dense tree, but the water is just relentless, totally disorienting him and pushing him straight into the unknown. Part 1. The Mysterious Tea Stall. Completely lost and disoriented, Raghu encounters a shadowy figure named Ratan who tells him the road ahead is blocked and offers him shelter at a secluded tea stall nearby. Raghu realizes he's taken a wrong turn. He is nowhere near Kusumpur. With this bag of money in his arms, the storm absolutely raging above him, and literally zero other options, he reluctantly agrees to follow this total stranger into the dark. So as Raghu follows Ratan toward this lone hut near a gab tree, our first major sensory warning hits. The source specifically notes a distinct, unsettling scent of something burnt, hanging really heavily in the damp air. It's a brilliant atmospheric detail. I mean, think about it. Why would a supposedly active tea stall smell like it recently burned down, especially in the middle of a torrential, soaking downpour? This little sensory subversion is our first real hint that things are definitely not what they seem. Inside the hut, Ratan serves him tea incredibly fast for such an abandoned-looking place, and then delivers this chilling line, "You will have to stay here tonight, Babuji," assuring Raghu that the fierce storm outside makes leaving totally impossible. The source notes Raghu's deep internal unease here. He's wondering, who would even visit a tea stall in such a desolate, lonely place? When Ratan tells him he's trapped for the night, Raghu's heart just begins to pound, and he grips his bag of money even tighter as that intense isolation sets in. Now pay close attention to the impossible contrast Raghu encounters right here. Despite the howling wind whipping through the cracks, the hurricane lamp's flame doesn't flicker even a single millimeter. It hints that something deeply unnatural is happening. The source text emphasizes this stark juxtaposition to really build the dread. Outside, it's absolute chaos, lightning, thunder, violent drafts of air. But inside, that flame is frozen, like a photograph. It's our first concrete physical clue that Raghu might be caught in a reality that just doesn't follow the laws of physics anymore. Section 2. Frightening shadows of the night. The dread escalates rapidly when Ratan calls his wife Jumar out to offer Raghu some pan before he goes to sleep. Ratan sets up a bed for him right by the doorway and casually mentions there's nothing to fear because he and his wife are right there. But Raghu feels this sharp pang in his chest, this pure instinctual warning that the real danger is actually just beginning. As Jomar approaches, that burnt smell from earlier is completely replaced by a horrific metallic stench that instantly freezes Raghu's blood. It's described as a sharp, rotten stench, exactly like raw blood. The explainer source uses this visceral, terrifying sensory detail to violently rip away any remaining illusion of safety. You can almost feel the paralyzing fear gripping Raghu at this exact moment. And the visual details are somehow even worse. She doesn't speak. She communicates only through these silent, eerie glances with Ratan. Then, a sudden gust of wind reveals a gruesome, actively bleeding cut straight across her throat before she completely disappears, just vanishes into thin air, leaving a totally terrified Raghu to try and sleep in this eerie quiet, broken only by a howling jackal and an owl outside. He just mechanically chews the pan, completely paralyzed by the oppressive silence. Eventually, Raghu passes out from pure exhaustion, but he wakes up to a terrifying scream and sees a body hanging right next to his bed. The source describes him hearing a creaking sound, turning his head, and seeing this horrifying apparition of a man hanging from a noose just an arm's length away. But when he blinks, the vision vanishes.
The sheer suffocating panic of this drives him out of his bed, covered in a cold sweat, desperately running out into the humid night to find Ratan. Section 3. Ratan's terrifying story. Sitting outside on a broken bamboo platform, Ratan offers to pass the restless night by telling Raghu a story from exactly 3 years ago. Ratan acts as if literally nothing strange has happened. He casually asks if Raghu had a bad dream, notes the oppressive heat, and just decides to recount the history of a tea stall that supposedly stood in this exact same spot. This brilliantly sets up Ratan's tale. It's about a happy marriage slowly poisoned by the creeping, unwanted attention of a lingering customer. Years ago, a tea stall owner marries a beautiful woman. Soon after, a man named Shankar begins buying a single cup of tea, but lingering for hours every day, just staring at her. The tension finally boils over on the fateful day the owner leaves for the market, senses a storm coming, and catches the early bus back home. The crucial point here is how quickly this story turns into an absolute bloodbath. The husband catches them, brutally murders his wife, hangs Shankar from the rafters, and then sets the entire hut ablaze with a lantern as lightning strikes. The source text details how the husband looked through the window and saw the betrayal. He struck his wife in the neck with a sharp weapon, which perfectly explains that bloody gash Raghu saw earlier, strangled and hung Shankar, and in a fit of absolute despair burned the entire place to the ground. Section 4. Bloody Truth and Horrific Mourning. Ratan's horrific story ends with the husband burning alive in his own tale, and suddenly, almost inexplicably, it's morning. Ratan tells a deeply shaken Raghu it's time to leave. The transition in the source material here is so abrupt and disorienting. One moment, Raghu is listening to a man screaming in agony in a fire, and the next, daylight has broken. Ratan simply tells him to get ready, and a traumatized Raghu grabs his bicycle and flees the scene without looking back. So Raghu practically flees on his bicycle, right? But halfway down the road, absolute panic sets in when the realization hits he left his bag full of money back at the hut. His fear of the ghostly encounters from the night before is suddenly, momentarily overpowered by the devastating real-world loss of his life savings. He really has no choice. He turns his bicycle around and heads back into the nightmare. Let's look at how this climax builds. He rushes back, but the completely intact tea stall from last night is just gone. It's replaced entirely by the charred, skeletal remains of a hut that clearly burned down 3 years ago. The source material delivers a massive psychological blow right here. Raghu realizes the story Ratan told wasn't just a story. It was a literal confession from beyond the grave. He had spent the entire night sheltered inside the ghostly echo of a triple murder. Standing there in absolute shock, trying to process this impossible reality, Raghu hears a voice from behind him, holding his bag, and the trap finally closes. "Are you perhaps looking for this?" He recognizes the voice. He knows exactly what's standing behind him. The supernatural world has tangible possession of his most valuable physical assets, and he has to turn around. He turns. The wind blows back the woman's veil. The stench of raw blood returns in full force, and Raghu is face to face with the mangled, bloody, terrifying, ghostly face of Juhar, the murdered wife. The sight causes him to instantly faint right there on the road. The source text loops these sensory details perfectly back to his earlier encounters. The raw blood, the open wound, the dead eyes. It's simply too much for the human mind to process, and Raghu collapses alongside his bicycle. As we wrap up this explainer, we want to leave you with this final, chilling thought to consider before you ever take shelter from a storm again. If you were in Raghu's place that night, caught in a blinding storm with your entire life savings, what would you honestly do? Would you have noticed the unmoving flame? Would you have stayed after smelling the raw blood? It's a fascinating look at how desperation can lead us right into the hands of the unknown. Thanks so much for exploring this dark and captivating narrative with me today.